White House, NSC, and State, DOD, Treasury, Armed Forces, then some scientists and researchers. With these initial comments, he's also had interactions with the business and 2 roundtables, one we just finished now. With these initial comments, I'll request EM to make his initial remarks, and then we can have the questions.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I think it's been 3 very active, intensive days in Washington. Ambassador has listed out the meetings and interactions that I've had. I'm coming here after a gap of a few months. I was last in April. A lot of things have happened during that period. Of course, our contacts with the administrations have continued, partly because I meet my counterpart quite often on the sidelines of other gatherings. We talk to each other sometimes as well on the phone. There have been continuing contacts, but there is nothing like a visit where you spend time, meet face-to-face, talk, not just with your counterpart, but other secretaries and leading officials, because our relationship today is so broad and frankly so important that it is essential to have that face-to-face engagement on a regular basis. Overall, my sense is ties are in a good place. If you look, we've been, our trade's been doing well, investment flows are good, our political exchanges have been very solid. There might be some process issues on visas, but in terms of, actual movement of people, it's on a longer time frame again been quite positive. Education, student numbers are again strong. So there's really a lot that we can look at and credit ourselves with. But having said that, I think both sides have recognized this is a relationship of a great capability and potential. There's still a lot of room for it to grow. There are new avenues that we could look at, and part of the reason for the meeting which the ambassador organized with the National Science Foundation was really how do we look at science and technology and research and collaboration in critical and emerging technologies, and really create some big broad avenues for further collaboration. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm I saw on the American side for that. He's walked you down some of my other meetings. But there's also a global context which is very important for my discussions. And, they reflected to a great deal my conversations at the UNGA as well. The world economy was already under a lot of stress because of the COVID. The Ukraine conflict and its repercussions have added to that. We've today, for a lot of countries, including us, higher energy costs, much higher energy costs are a source of obvious anxiety. We can see food inflation in some countries even face availability challenges. That's another big worry. There are justified concerns about fertilizers, access to fertilizers and trade in fertilizers. And remember, today's fertilizer problem is going to be tomorrow's food problem. Many countries are struggling with unsustainable debt. There are trade disruptions. So the big picture, quite honestly, in the world is not an optimistic picture. I think we have a very worried international community, and I saw that for myself in the UN General Assembly. So that too, where was a sort of a broader context in which we had discussions. Because today, if you look at the India-US relationship, it's not a narrow relationship only devoted to each other's gains. I think our relationship today impacts the rest of the world. Definitely does the Indo-Pacific. There are a lot of countries who look to us individually or bilaterally for some part of the betterment which they hope for, and the solutions which the world is searching for in many respects. So that's the sort of broad sense which I want to give you. A bilateral, a very solid, positive, productive bilateral conversation, but framed in the context of larger global challenges, where there's a high degree of convergence on how we look at those challenges. We may articulate it a little bit differently. It's natural, our positions will not be identical, our priorities may sometimes be a little bit different. But again, the good part of the relationship is today that we understand that we have to make space for each other, and that we can work with each other even if we do not entirely agree on every aspect of every issue. So it was I would say, a very comfortable visit in that sense. I think we had some very good conversations. But I'd be happy to respond to any questions or comments or clarifications you may have.
Just to mention, EM is leaving this evening. Hanji.
Sorry. EM, thank you so much for this press conference. Okay, I want to take you back to the Prime Minister's comments in Samarkand, and if I may. The first part has been reported about, and much excitement has been around the first part, that there is not the air of war. The second part is what I'm interested in. The second part is that he said that on phone, we have had this conversation on phone, and we have discussed this very often, that diplomacy and dialogue is the way out. So what happened? What made the Prime Minister go public with this? Something that he had been talking to, as he said, to President Putin privately on telephone calls, but publicly bringing it up, saying this is not an era of war and that you need to...
I'm not sure I would put it the way that you have put it. Remember, this was the first face-to-face meeting which the Prime Minister was having with President Putin after the commencement of the Ukraine conflict. They last met in December of last year. So, it was very natural when they have a face-to-face meeting that, you begin the meeting, the press is there, you make the press remarks, and if you look at the video of that particular occasion, that's exactly what happened. Now, it's not as if we have not said that before, that we have been expressing our concern about the conflict, about the need, about the urgency for early cessation of hostilities, about the need for dialogue and diplomacy. So there has been a steady refrain. So I think, to my mind, it was entirely natural that if the Prime Minister of India and the President of Russia were meeting at this juncture, that these subjects would be addressed, and I think that's what the Prime Minister did.
Saurabh Shukla.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Minister, you've had a good visit at the UN and now here bilaterally in Washington, D.C. you spoke about the global context, and in this context, I'm sure you had a discussion with the U.S. counterparts on China. You've served there, and I recall that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a lot of efforts to bend the relationship with China. You did it. I was part of the delegation when you had gone to Beijing just before COVID. Where do you see the U.S. and India's interest converging when it comes to China? How do you handle a belligerent China, I would say, in Indo-Pacific? Because certainly the relationship between India and China, China and the US is not in a great term. How do you handle China bullying its neighbors in this Indo-Pacific and in the global context?
Where Indian and US interests converge, and they do, I think is on the stability and the security, the progress, the prosperity, the development of the Indo-Pacific. Because you have seen, even in the case of Ukraine, a war fought a great distance away has the potential, has the capability of actually creating turbulence across the world in terms of implications for the daily lives of people. So you have to understand today this is a very globalized, extremely interlocked, a very interdependent world. And it is therefore, we all, to say that we have skin in the game is an understatement. I think we have vital stakes today in ensuring that the larger region is stable, that it is secure, that there is cooperation, that the focus is on the right things. And to my view, what we have seen in recent years is an India whose interests and inclinations extend sufficiently eastwards into the Pacific, and a United States which is open enough to work flexibly and comfortably with partners, going beyond the orthodox limitations in the past of treaties and alliances and so on. So the world has changed, and frankly, all of us have changed along with it. And we do today appreciate that no single country by itself can actually shoulder the responsibilities or the burdens of international peace and common good. That it requires a collective effort, it requires a cooperative effort. And India-US is one part of it. We have a bigger gathering or a coordination in terms of the Quad. But there are still bigger ones. I mean, if you look at two new initiatives, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the Indo-Pacific Initiative for Maritime Domain Awareness, they extend beyond them. They are open, they have multiple players out there. So to me, a globalized world, countries who are conscious today that the world is not unipolar, it's not bipolar. There have to be multiple players. They need to work together. There are common interests at stake out here. The rest of the region actually looks at many of the more capable countries to pull their weight and work together. I think that's the kind of situation. I believe in defining international affairs in positive terms. That's usually how diplomacy is done. So I would urge you to think of it as really a betterment or a strengthening of the Indo-Pacific as a shared objective between us.
PTI Lalit Jha.
Thank you, sir. During the meetings with Secretary Blinken, did you raise the issue of F-16, with them in particular, and did they raise the issue of India buying oils and other things from Russia? And secondly, you mentioned about we have a worried international community, as Prime Minister always says, Aapda mein Avshar. What are the opportunities for India in this hour of crisis?
With Secretary Blinken, not just with Secretary Blinken, I think a number of issues pertaining to our neighborhood came up. You can guess the obvious, but I would not like to characterize the discussion in detail because it's a discussion within a closed room. And by the way, that was also applied to the energy scenario as well. In fact, that particular subject, there were a wider set of discussions and consultations involving others beyond state as well. In terms of it's a difficult scenario and what are the opportunities, I think today there is an expectation, and here I go back to my UNGA discussion. One of the reasons why there were so many meetings this time, frankly, there was a lot of demand for meetings. Countries wanted to talk to us. And countries wanted to talk to us because there is a belief that we are in touch with key players, we can influence them, we can shape their thinking, we can contribute. We are prepared sometimes to say things which many others cannot say, or reach out to countries and leaders in a way may not be possible for everybody to do so. So I would say there is more than opportunities for India because it's a very difficult situation. I think there are contributions that India can make. I think we have today a stabilizing role, we have a bridging role, we have a diplomatic role. We have to really see in economic terms how can we contribute to the de-risking of the global economy. I think in political terms, how can we in some way help depolarize the world. I think those are really expectations that a lot of other countries, especially countries of the global south, have of us. Obviously, we will try and do what we can, and we remain in touch with all the important countries of the world in that regard.
Sukhpal Dhanwa.
Thank you, Mr. Master. My question is, thank you, sir. My question is on education. As I've been watching, you were very busy and meeting in New York and here different Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Commerce. Did you get a chance to meet anyone from the Biden administration or any organizations on this education field or that? And the second is related to education as well, but that is not question but concern. As we saw in United States, it has been a long time now, sometimes bullying and those kind of incidents. And recently, one incident happened in North Carolina University. One Sikh, Amritari Sikh, was arrested. And I'm glad embassy immediately involved. I got messages, what is happening, and we've been working. So is there any way embassy can take call on those kind of incident, and with the Indian American community, we can take some initiative to educate those kind of police and universities? And why I'm talking about this education, I've been watching Ambassador Sandhu was interacting and communicating more than 125 representative or university presidents and so forth. So it will be easy for us to use that platform which he created. Thank you.
The first question in my interactions with the Biden administration, did education come up? Did I interact with anybody dealing with education? The answer is a yes. The education field has different facets to it. One issue right now, for example, is students even getting visas to come to the United States, and the visa issue was something that I took up with the secretary. It came up in the press conference that we did as well, and he explained the compulsions and the constraints on the US. And I think he was very sincere about wanting to rectify the situation. But in terms of students who are here, I think some of the education-related issues came up at the roundtable which NSF did. In fact, there were presidents of 2 universities there, apart from officials who dealt with research and education. With Secretary Blinken himself, and I think to a certain extent some of the other secretaries, the issue came up in terms of the link which students provide today between the 2 countries. That if you see what has changed between our 2 countries, and in fact I spoke about this even in my address to the community. What has really changed with India and the United States, apart from the strategic, the political, the leadership, the government guidance, is actually the people to people, the living bridge between us. And at the heart of the living bridge are students. So we today in the Modi government, we give an enormous importance to the welfare and the interests of students. With a number of countries, we are actually negotiating migration and mobility agreements which will allow for opportunities for students to work, to financially support themselves. Where there are concerns on visas, we have addressed them. We actually have within our website a sub-website which is actually dedicated to students. And when there are problems in the United States, I think you have seen the embassy, and sometimes where occasion requires the foreign ministry in Delhi, we take it up. And I think today the strength of our relationship with the United States, it actually allows for very frank and honest conversations, not just on the student issues, I think even on other issues.
If I may just draw your attention, last time when External Affairs Minister was here, he especially went to Harvard University along with Secretary of State, did an education event there, yes, if you remember. I have Rohit Sharma.
Thank you, Minister, for doing this. Vice President Harris is in Japan for the funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister. There she's meeting with the Australian Prime Minister. She's also meeting with the new Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida.